Ending Life Talk Radio.
In this week's guest podcast of the week, James E. interviews author Frank McGroarty about the third of his trilogy of books set in Butlin's Ayr.
Ending Life Talk Radio.
Lazing on a Sunday afternoon, I got no time to worry. Hello.
Good day to you, sir.
How's things? How's things?
Yeah, fine. How have you managed with your audiobook doing?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really made much progress in terms of the audiobook. I've been going through a bit of a reinvention of myself because I'm trying to become Mr. Efficient. I've just gone through an online course.
Right.
Where it was to do with trying to develop online businesses, and I know, and because of that, I discovered I had to do a lot of work on my website. Plus, there's been things happening to me the past month and a bit where I've had to sort of reevaluate how I do things in terms of the way I've put stuff together in terms of work, because what I did in the past, I can't go down that road anymore. I've got to try and do it from a different angle. When we've got new software. How I do my recordings, how I do my writing, everything's got to change.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, do you think it will be better and more efficient?
That's the plan. That's the plan. That's the plan. Because I mean, a large percentage of my stuff's done in my front room. Plus the thing with the writing. I mean, when I did the last book took me a lot longer than normal, and it was because of different circumstances. And I think we kind of briefly touched on some of them when we talked before, and it was I couldn't for the life of me figure out why it was taking so long, but now I know why it's taking me so long. It's just a case of now I've just got to start looking at things from a different angle, the way I do things, and it kind of explained a lot of things in terms of my writing style, because with my writing style I never tried to complicate things, because rather than go too heavy on the description. Try and sort of make it as easy to read as possible. Don't get people bogged down with too much background images and all that kind of stuff. Because that was never me. But now it's a case of, I think that's my style now. It's just a case of, if you try and sort of go too heavy or too complicated, you'll put a lot of people off.
Yeah. It's funny though, because I think that you have to kind of like reinvent yourself. Not on a regular basis, but on a kind of semi-regular basis, it helps. If you can kind of look at yourself in different ways.
Well, I mean, I do that kind of thing all the time. I mean, when Mike and I first started the Lunchtime Experience, many in the dark and distant past, but both him and I are totally different broadcasters for what we are now, and it's a case of every sort. You don't try and analyze yourself too much. When I did stand-up comedy. That's the worst thing you do. It's just a case of listen to it and say, right, let's see if we can try this or try that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. I must admit, I've kind of done that a few times over the years as well, because I started out essentially as an actor. Yeah. And then I also sang in that at the same time, but predominantly showbiz started for me as an actor. Yeah. And then I kind of developed it into a sort of producing and directing. And then along the way, I got into radio, and then I got into a band properly. So quite a few different kind of incarnations, if you like.
Well, I would say things when you're creative and you like producing things, you always want to see how far, try and push the boundaries, give yourself new challenges all the time. And I think the challenges things, the main sort of criteria that sort of links a lot of us. Whether it's a performer or whether you want to put things together, doing things like books, audio books. I mean, there was a time when I never even contemplated audiobooks. And it was a case of when somebody then said to me, why not do an audiobook? And I thought, well, why not? I've got the gear. Why not? Let's do it. And every audiobook that I've done, you learn from your mistakes. And it's a case of being able to progress. I mean, I've never sort of said, I've tried it and failed. It's just you try things. If it doesn't work, right, you just say, right, can you make it better? No, let's try and do something else.
Yeah. I knew a guy many years ago who used to do that, for blind people. So he would read the newspapers and, books and stuff like that. And they probably still have, but they had a kind of like a central library, as it were. You know, that they could go and, you know, they could take it and then return it and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, talking newspapers. I remember that was, we're talking about sort of, I remember them going back to, say, the late 70s when they sort of first started that. It was like the cassette tapes and things. That was like the forerunner for the stuff that we've got now. But I think when we're talking about trying to sort of reinvent yourself, you know, being able to adapt. Since I recorded the last audiobook, I have now got a new plate on my top lip. I've got false teeth in there, so even then it's a case of you try not to sort of project your voice too much in case the dentures come flying out at the microphone, you know. So this is okay. These are the kind of challenges you have to face when you're over 21. You know,
absolutely. No, it's funny you just say that, because I've just recently got a similar thing. I had been in quite a bad motorbike accident in the mid-80s, and they were going to take away the two stumps of the front two teeth when they were operating to wire up my jaw and all that kind of stuff. And thankfully, the surgeon decided to take another X-ray, and they discovered there was a tiny hairline fracture. And if they'd pulled that, they'd have pulled all that part of the jaw away as well. So they left it, and then I went to the dental hospital and they capped them, and that lasted for donkey's years. And it was only like last year during the initial lockdown that I started to have problems with them, and then eventually, you know, they had to get taken away, you know.
But as we become more wiser, we learn the art of just trying to adapt to the circumstances. You know, when you have things like the lockdown, you know, like I knew we knew the lockdown was coming. It's a case of saying, right, we can't change anything. We just have to get on with it the best way we can. You know, granted, I was a wee bit fortunate in terms of doing, you know, what's my regular job. I was still doing that, but the thing was, I was missing out on the reunions with my Butlins pals. And so the thing is, Zoom then became a big factor. And then you saw was a lot of people thinking out the box and a whole lot of different things. And it was such a joy to see, you know, especially with the TV shows. I mean, one of my favourite programmes from last year was that thing David Tennant did with Michael Sheen, Staged.
I've never seen that.
I mean, I'm not normally one for recommending, but I think it was one of the funniest programs on the box last year, because it was like two actors stuck twiddling their thumbs during lockdown, and they're communicating through Zoom. I mean, I thought that's them trying to be creative, you know. And it's going back to the thing we're talking about adapting, you know.
I must admit, because obviously when our physical studio had to close, I was off air for a while because I didn't have equipment at home. So to get equipment in, and it was a wee bit of trial and error. Some equipment we bought wasn't good enough, and some of the broadcasting apps that we were trying weren't good enough. Eventually we found the happy medium, as it were. And although I quite like doing it from home, I'll be glad when we actually get another physical studio on the go.
I mean, that's one thing I do miss. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love doing what I'm doing, and I am trying to sort of produce the best show that I can. I do miss being in a studio. You know, it's been a long time. I mean, we must be talking about more than 10 years since I've actually set foot in a studio. Because when I did the stuff for Ferguson Park Radio, that closed down. We then did a brief stint at Pulse FM. That only lasted for a short period. Then after that, it was going to be just sort of try and record stuff in the first available place, you know. And that was the same as you. I had to try and build up the equipment, because when I started doing recording at home, all I had was my laptop and a USB mic. That was all I had. And now I've got a lot more. I mean, I'm the same as you. I've got a lot more kit and things. You feel you're producing something a bit more professional. You know,
absolutely.
Because the thing is, you're not just a case of doing it for the sake of doing it. You want to do it because you want to present the best kind of show possible for folk, and hopefully that they enjoy it. You know, you go and try and take care from stuff from your end, and it's a case of hopefully that passes on to the other folk. Because the last thing they want to do is listen to stuff like all the background noises and the crashes and stuff like that. You know.
Because I mean, like, I would never have done anything like this before the lockdown. You know, I know people, you know, they had FaceTime and stuff like that, and used to FaceTime with their iPhones and things, but that was something that never really interested me. But because of the circumstances, I was forced to reevaluate. And now I think I'm quite good at this whole Zoom thing. You know, I mean, I've done Zoom conversations with people in different parts of the world for, you know, my radio shows.
Yeah.
So I'm becoming more adept at it, just through necessity.
It is good when it works. I mean, I think when I we did the Butlins things with the pals to begin with, I was like very much like your Max Headroom, you know, with this sort of you know, and it just but we couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. But then I was on that online course this week. The guy that was doing the online course had about 140 to about 180 people online at the same time.
Right.
And he was recording it and doing a sort of online course. This guy was based in the States. And so people were tuning in everywhere, Australia, Switzerland, everywhere. And he was using the Zoom.
Right.
But it's a very good thing to have. Very good thing to have.
Yeah. So, question for you: how do you get the donkeys upstairs?
It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. What it was, that statement evolved from the Donkey Derby.
Yeah.
You think of Butlins holiday camps, there's certain things that automatically spring to mind. Noblinese contest, and the Donkey Derby was another one. And the thing was, we always used to have the Donkey Derby held in a sports field, right? Yeah. And it was always a case of, let's say, eight jockeys, and it were always kids that were on holiday that week. And you had the donkeys, and it was held in a sports field. And so I've had to do it myself, make the announcement, and I did it on the disco floor one time, and I had to do on Radio Butlins as well. And I shall give you an example, right? This is Radio Butlins calling with a special announcement. Due to the inclement weather, today's Donkey Derby will be held in the Stuart Ballroom. And if you've ever seen the Stuart Ballroom, it's a massive escalator.
Yeah.
Right? And the thing was, we were on a disco, and the thing was, the Redcoats used to have so much fun with that. And they used to say, we need 4 guys to help get some donkeys up these stairs. And it ends up people are coming up to me saying, somebody's just called for us. But the Redcoat had done it, it basically scarpered, you know. And the likes of they used to do that all the time. I said about how the titles were based on the different questions, and that was one. It was always getting asked.
Yeah.
And whenever they said Donkey Derby, because the Stuart Ballroom is basically your backup plan in case it was chucking it down with rain. And they, I don't think they ever quite understood the concept of how it was going to work in the Stuart Ballroom, you know. And some of them were actually deadly serious when he says, "How do you get the donkeys up the stairs?" You know.
I can actually, in my mind's eye, picture, you know, somebody being a wee bit stumped by that. You know, how are we going to get a donkey up here? You know,
and they're deadly serious about it as well, because I remember we actually had a few volunteers come to the side of the stage. Saying, "Right, we're ready to get your hand," you know. I mean, we never got shortage of volunteers. But I will say though, I never created that. I was never the troublemaker on that point. I was usually the person who's the Redcoat would announce it, and then basically it was me who have to sort of carry the can.
You know? You had to try and sort it out.
Basically, yeah.
I like it. So with book 3, obviously it's the final chapter, if you like. And am I right? Was it a little bit shorter than the other 2 books?
And if you're talking about the page count, it's shorter. However, word count, it was more than the first one.
Right.
The reason being was I changed the software I was using.
Right.
Because when I was doing it before, you were doing things like the chapter heading was always like so far halfway down the page and so forth, and they were using different fonts and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it was about maybe between 5,000 and 10,000 words more than the first one.
Right.
And it's just a case of when it's assembled the way it was on the different software, there was less pages.
Right.
And, you know, it wasn't as much as the second one, but it certainly was a lot more than the first one.
Yeah, because it was just when I finished reading it, I thought to myself, that seems a wee bit short, you know, and the amount of time it's taken me to read it. But then in saying that, I mean, I do read quite quickly.
Yeah.
You know, I can go through, especially if I'm into a book. I mean, I could go through a book in a day quite easily, you know.
That I wish I could say the same from my point of view. Because when I was at school, if I read a book, if you were meant to read a book, it could take them 3 days. I would take about 3 weeks to read a book. You know, and it's something that's I never really understood why, but now I do know. And as it's going back to the thing about how it's reflected on my style of writing. And but certainly, I was the one thing I didn't want was to make the book the shortest one in terms of word count. If I'd have got it below the number of the cabaret book, then that would have caused that would have been a problem. It would have been a lack of content. But I was always determined to make sure it was at least more than the first one. You know. And also the other thing is you didn't want to push it out too much to try and match the word count for the second one, because I think looking back, I think there was maybe a wee bit too much in the second one. But even though a lot of people thought that it was good in terms of character development, you know, it was just my own personal thing. And I thought, well, just try and be a bit more focused on what you're doing. We've got the new software, but the main thing was, if you do it too little, you're missing something. Do it too much, you're kind of pushing the boat out. And I didn't want to push the boat out, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, I assume that there are probably things that you could have put in, or perhaps you had put into original drafts and then taken out, you know, on rereading it. Would that be right?
Well, I did get a lot of stories sent when people knew I was working on the last book, and I was looking for different scenarios, different stories, because there was a lot in that final season. I spent first half of the season in the gym, and so I never got to see a lot of stuff that was going on. So the thing was, there was a lot of things I had to usually rely on other folk, but people were sending me in stories about incidents and stuff like that. And whilst there was some brilliant stuff in there, you had to also go back to think it in terms of the story, because I didn't want it to be so a nostalgia trip, because that's what the first one, the book was was a nostalgia trip. I didn't want to say, right, make it a nostalgia trip, even though I wanted it to be a celebration of what it meant, you know, that being at Butlins and so forth. I didn't want to sort of make it too high, because we wanted to we had to make sure we were not just fair to people that liked the trip down memory lane, but we also had to make sure we were fair to people that were following the characters as well. Yeah. Because we had to look at things from two sides, you know what I
mean? Yeah, because I was thinking specifically when you were at the kids thing, you know, for a month before starting
Adventure Weeks. The Adventure Weeks,
And in book 3, you talk about a group of kids who are, shall we say, not engaged.
Challenging.
And a teacher who was there with them who probably felt he should have been somewhere else.
The teacher just couldn't give her, for instance. You did get that. And so there was a time where the kids usually threw themselves into it, but it was just on that one occasion, there was a group of kids from a school who were just rowdy. You know, their definition of a good time was they just did what they want and forget who they stood on along the way. And the teacher wasn't exactly Mr. Enthusiastic when it came to controlling the crowd. And of course, when we were trying to deal with classes, we had to be careful what we did. Yeah. Because if we went a wee bit too far, then of course all they need to do was complain, and suddenly we were a problem. You know.
Exactly.
I mean, I had an instance one time where on my first season where my brother met me. He came down to the camp at Ayr, and this young little sweetheart, about 14 he was, started to throw sticks at me, right? And I was trying to be Mr. Firm and fair, and he said, you're a redcoat, you can't do anything. And my brother was standing beside me. He says, no, he can't, but I can. You've never seen a 14-year-old run so fast in your life.
When I was reading that bit in the book about those kids, I was thinking to myself, that is like a microcosm of how society has changed, over the years, whereby it used to be that, well, as a child, you might not like somebody, telling you to do this or do that, or, to behave or whatever. You did it because that authority, of an adult was kind of absolute.
You respect authority.
Yeah. And then over the years, obviously, that's changed and it's still changing. I mean, I sometimes see it even to this day, when I'm out, somebody's out with their kids and the kids are misbehaving and the parent is trying to get them to behave, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I don't agree with it, but in some instances you see them, you know, they smack the kid or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with them doing that, you know. In fact, a couple of times I've told people off for doing it.
Yeah. I can understand that. Yeah, absolutely. I can absolutely understand that.
But it was just, you know, it kind of was like the opposite image of how, you know, in the first two books you'd done your adventure weeks and they had been great, you know, and the kids were really into it and stuff like that. And I was just thinking to myself when I was reading it, that just shows you how things have changed, even in that sort of short period of time from when you first did it to that third time, how much things had changed in the way that people didn't really respect folk anymore.
I think the other thing was in the third book, when you look at it from the Terry character point of view, was when he went in for the first season, he was naive, he was excited, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when we got to the third season, he was more aware of things going on. It wasn't a case of, he loved the job. It was his dream job. He absolutely loved it. But the thing was, he still wanted the fun element. But the thing is, because he'd been this was his third season, he became more aware that there were people there that were just there for themselves. They were there, regardless of what you did, and because of their behaviour, that was taking an element of the fun out of it. And the thing was, he wanted it so much to be fun. And the thing was, this was the first time when he came across people that were basically challenging him, and he never wanted to be challenged. Yeah. Because the thing was, he was there to do something for them, but the fact that they're fighting back, it's a difficult one to take. And the thing was, maybe what was going through his mind was he didn't know how to deal with that. And the fact that he was working alongside a guy who was an army instructor, who knew how to manage people. And the thing is, going back to the thing I was talking about, how you learn from things, and he started to learn from this guy, and of course that then sort of pushed him in a possible new career direction himself, because he became more aware, saying, maybe this is the way I should be going, because he was learning so much about human behaviour. He knew that Bolton's thing was coming to an end. You know, it had to come to an end, and so the thing was, he was more observant. He was more, you know, half and half. He was more of trying to sort of still be fun, make it a memorable final season, but he wasn't expecting all these things happening, you know, and that kind of dragged him down a bit. And eventually, when he started to become knowledgeable how to deal with it, he then started to cope with it again.
Yeah, and it kind of continued a little bit, you know, when you had the issue with the Ents manager who, you know, would insist in saying, you know, Terence. Yes. You know, and all that. But Terry, you know, as you say in the book, and then getting stuck into the, you know, that gym, which for someone who, you know, when you read the other two books, you get a feel for the character's enthusiasm, and for somebody to be shut away, you know, and essentially an empty room, you know, it's got to be a wee bit soul destroying.
That's the way it felt during those the first few weeks. Because I mean, my personal feelings about the job was and still is the same. Yeah. But the thing was, when I went into the gym, it was 5 bikes at the back, a multi gym that was no weights involved. It was all hydraulics, and you had a couple of crash mats. That was it. Yeah. You know, and the thing is, people go on holiday unless they've got their own purpose in mind. You know, it was never a busy place. Yeah. You know, and what I usually liked about working there was getting amongst the punters, being with the punters. Yeah. You know, really interacting with them. And the thing was, I wasn't getting that. And that was the thing. That was one thing I wanted to put through with Terry when he was doing that third season. Yeah. And when you talk about the wrestlers who come in, there's one person in particular. Yes. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but would that have been Adrian Street by any chance? No. Oh, right. No. It was in that mold. He was in that mold. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't know what's happened to him now. But he had long white hair. Sort of the face of a guy sort of 20 years older than what he's supposed to be, you know. And he talked with a very effeminate voice, right? Because I'm standing there and I'm getting introduced to him. And he spoke to me, and I started trying, you know, stay focused. Don't say anything, you know, because I didn't know how to react. Because in those days, there was something you weren't used to. And previously, when you look at Adrian Street and all these guys, it was a character. But the fact that this was somebody away from the ring acting like that, And he was a great guy. He was an absolutely great guy. I remember him when I was on holiday at Filey. He was part of the wrestling squad at Filey, so I knew who he was.
Yeah.
And the guy that was who was like the sort of main man amongst the wrestlers in terms of it was like the lead guy. He wasn't sort of the star man, but he was the sort of the shop steward, as it were. And he says, don't let the effeminate voice fool you. He's one of the toughest so-and-sos around, But I mean, I had a great time with the wrestlers. They were great, The guys like them coming into the gym really brightened up my day.
Yeah,
I was looking forward to that.
Yeah, and it just kind of, for me, obviously not having had a holiday at Butlins, I would never have thought that there would have been wrestlers.
Oh,
there. Probably a lot of things that might have happened that I might not have imagined would have happened.
It was a key part of the entertainment program. I mean, what you used to get was the red coats were the seconds, and sometimes you get the red coat compere, who would be maybe the referee or the MC.
Aye.
And used to set up and when we're talking about air, they used to set the ring up in the middle of the ballroom, and it was total goodies versus baddies stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking about the old Ken Walton live from Middlesbrough Town Hall, I mean, it was that kind of level, and you get all the women throwing things, with the handbags and all this kind of stuff. It was brilliant. I loved it when they did it at Filey. Filey was, I used to go there all the time.
Yeah.
I never got on duty for those sessions, but my wife, she was one of the seconds one time. But it was like the atmosphere in that place was always brilliant anyway.
Yeah, it was kind of like, because obviously, of a certain generation, you probably would have watched World of Sport on a Saturday, and the wrestling would have been on there. Yeah. And you would see, what it was like. But I remember the first time I actually went to a proper, live wrestling event. I was actually quite shocked that the kind of level of enmity from sections of the audience.
They did not. Listen, the only time I've seen that kind of level, see when you take the level from the audience, the only time you get this kind of level is if you make a mistake calling the bingo.
Yeah.
You deviate from that, that's how you're toast.
Yeah, I've experienced that firsthand actually. I was down visiting one of my sisters who lived in London at the time, and she said to me, "Do you want to come to the bingo?" And I'm like, "The bingo?" Yeah. When I went along, and I thought I had completed the line, so I shouted and I was wrong, and it was like pure hatred.
Exactly. I mean, if you deviate from the bingo slightly, they expect it done in a serious way.
Yeah.
But on saying that though, I mean, I called the bingo one time and some woman got off her seat and ran, basically chased me along the front part of the stage because she thought her number had come up. She's giving me one of them big bear hugs, and I'm mouthing to the audience saying, "Please get her off."
But again, that just demonstrates how much people get into it.
Oh,
they really buy into whatever that particular event is. Whether it's the wrestling, whether it's the bingo, they get so involved in it. And from the tape that you, the show that you'd sent me the video of, you could see that even though the quality wasn't 100%, you could still see and feel, from the reaction of the audience, that they were into, whatever was happening on stage.
Oh, that's the thing we talked about briefly before, about the thing about how on a Red Coat show, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And that clip I sent you had the classic "you being framed" moment, but the thing is, even like, so we went into the final season, there were things that were going wrong. I mean, when I performed as Dracula in that final show, and I finished up at the medical one day because one of the I think I did touch on it in the book was it's the Dave Allen sketches where Dracula comes back being absolutely sozzled, and as he's about to get in his coffin, his wife jumps out back shouting, "Where have you been at this time of night?" kind of thing. And she normally hit me with a wooden. She would usually hit me with a wooden spoon. She didn't have a wooden spoon that night. She had a ladle. Yeah. Right. And she caught me on the softest part of my arm, and she caught me so well the actual thing broke.
Oh,
and the ladle broke, and it actually span into the orchestra pit, missing one of the guys by a few inches. And it ended up, I had this nagging pain in my arm for the rest of that night, and I had to go to the medic the next day. And I went to the nurse and said, I've hurt my arm. She says, how did you hurt your arm? And she said, and I couldn't make it up, you know. And I said, well, the wife jumped out the coffin and hit me over the arm with a ladle. And she says, you redcoats have always got a damn excuse. And I wasn't kidding either.
So that brings me to, obviously you have that period at the beginning at Ayr with that manager. He goes for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Somebody you know really well comes in and takes over. And the opportunities start to happen again for Terry. But what I was a wee bit surprised with, well, maybe not even surprised actually when I think about it, was the guy who was the compere who didn't give you the kind of encouragement from the previous year, you know, when you were going to do your stand-up. And I thought to myself, do you know what? I actually know people like that as well, who they maybe not want you to do terribly wrong or terribly badly, but they don't really feel that they have, you know, I don't know if it's an ability to encourage you. Or
in case you're better than he is.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of when I was in the Ceilidh band, the guy who was kind of the leader of the Ceilidh band and did all of the singing, I did a lot of the, you know, backing vocals and stuff. He lost his voice.
Yeah.
And I get pushed forward to do the main, you know, vocals for the songs and things. And after this particular gig, all these people were coming up, you know, and they were saying how great I was and all the rest of it. Yeah. And I could see this fella at the side of my eye, you know, and he was absolutely fuming. And as soon as he was able, I was back, you know, tough to the side.
so, I mean, to be honest, when I think with the stand-up, initially, when I looked at the stand-up, I was looking no further than the Redcoat show, you know. And then when it came to the idea, I mean, I was wanting to get. I'd been involved in so many shows the year before, and the idea of doing a stand-up routine for the Redcoat show was something I thought was a natural progression, especially as I'd done the Prince Charles the year before. And then when suddenly they're saying you're doing the half hour and this thing, initially I was thinking, you know, what's this all about, you know? But then I looked at it from another perspective, saying, when you do stand-up comedy in a club or a theatre, you've got to go through a period where you basically fall flat in your face. Yeah. You know, and I then started to look at it as a learning experience. So when it eventually got to the Glasgow Fair, you know, that's when things really started to settle down a bit, you know? Yeah. And I then felt, well, hang on a second, maybe I'm actually learning this. So part of me was saying, you know, is somebody got an ulterior motive? Or is the other thing that was saying, is this me trying to tough love, you know, learning the hard way? So, yeah. And that was the kind of sort of questions that Terry was asking himself during that period in the book. Yeah. And I don't know, you probably found this as well, but audiences, depending on where they're from, can often be quite different. You know, even if it's like a predominantly Scottish audience, if they're predominantly, say, from Glasgow, and then the next week they're predominantly, say, from Edinburgh, there are differences to how they interact, as it were. Well, I mean, when the Glasgow Fair, I think I did highlight it in the book when it was a Glasgow Fair week. Yeah. And Terry went on stage and he had basically it was a full of Glaswegians, you know, and he's saying about who's the Rangers supporters, who's the Celtic supporters. You know, I take it you lot in the middle are atheists, you know, that kind of thing. You know, and when you became more experienced, more comfortable in your skin going on the stage, you can you became aware of the kind of things you're talking about. The fact is, you know, a lot of the gags you were maybe doing for Glasgow audience doesn't work for people from, say, like, you know, from the home counties or something, you know. Exactly. So you have to be able to adapt, and that's why another thing about Butlins was a good training ground, because you learned how to do things like that. Eventually, when Terry puts the idea about why is he in the bar, the moment he started looking at it as a learning experience and he could see progression, you know, he previously he was looking for approval all the time, and it got to the point where he was just looking to learn, because all he wanted to do was focus on himself rather than focus on what other people thought. And if people liked it, then that was great. Yeah, and when he had the midnight audition, that definitely would have been something that would have probably crushed him without having had the previous experience and encouragement from the compere of the year before. Yeah, I mean, when I was writing the book, I mean, I did say, there was a lot of true stuff in there. As I started for 10. That late night audition happened. I'd finished my shift at the Stuart Ballroom, and next thing I know, I had to go to the Gaiety Theatre. And suddenly I find myself doing an audition at about 1 o'clock in the morning. And how I got through it, I have no idea. But it was enough to get me through it. But that was one thing I had to put in there,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because it also showed the growth of the Terry character as well, from the beginning in book 1 through to this book 3, where he's now at a level where, yes, it was a scary situation because he didn't really have an audience to deal with. But you just, as you say in the book, you just have to kind of like blank it out and go for it and do the best that you can.
Yeah, it's all about, as you said, it's all about growth, the growth of the character from the young boy who basically puts his childhood bit behind him. He then becomes an adult, and he's now starting to sort of look around from a young adult's eyes, rather than just the kids sort of stomping their feet every so often. And as he was learning all these different things, he was forever learning, and from doing things. I mean, I highlighted in that second book how he wanted to expand on his existing skills. Learn new things. And that was a theme he was wanting to try and develop. So by the time he got to the camp, he was a lot more skilled up than what he was from the previous season.
Yeah. And it's certainly the thing I took from all 3 books in terms of never really given a lot of thought to, redcoats or whatever. But having read the books, I can see how it was a great way to learn new things.
Oh, yeah.
But also improve on maybe skills that you already had, and also to make you more personable.
Connect to an audience. I mean, that's a key thing for me. I mean, when they talk about the redcoats and stars, the redcoats from the early days were stars for one reason. They knew how to connect with people.
Yeah.
You get somebody like Freddie Davis. Freddie Davis is a comic legend.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, he knows how to not just walk on stage or be funny. He knows how to connect with people.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of people from those days that really know how to do that. But now, the star element, I don't think it's as strong as what it used to be, because it's like a fast track kind of thing.
Yeah.
You get all this thing about somebody being an overnight success, having been in the business for about 30 years, and that's them learning, because it's when you're performing, you've got to connect with folk.
That's it.
And the thing is that was one of the key elements about Butlins. You had to know how to connect yourself with people. And when we got to likes of the Redcoat show, by the end of that week, people knew you before you even walked onto that stage.
Yeah.
And that sort of helps you when you're doing any sort of acts and stuff like that.
And I take it was, relatively speaking, a short turnaround time in terms of, putting the show together. Because obviously you've got other duties, that you need to do. Yeah,
well, from what I remember was we would usually get a note in the notice. We would say the first day of the season was Saturday, right? There were a note on maybe the notice board on the Monday saying there'll be the first rehearsal of the Redcoat show would be either maybe later on that night or the following day. And in the final season, the Redcoat show had been moved to the Thursday as opposed to the Friday.
Yeah.
And when you went to the rehearsal, the compere would bring a lot of his routines over from another camp. So the thing is, he might have discussed with the manager what routines you can put in place. So it might be a case of filling in with maybe a couple of sore spots from people, likes of, maybe some, you say, right, you've got, they probably have about half the show already done in terms of the sketches. And because it's established, once it'd be quick to learn, a lot of the people who were cabaret artists would have known what they say, right, you're going to do a 5-minute spot there. So they know straight away what they're going to do. And some likes of, you're maybe, if you're talking there going at night time after you finish your duty at 1 o'clock, it's 12:30, 1 o'clock, you would get back to your chalet about 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And you then still had to be ready for a 8:30 breakfast.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, so you had so many other things to do. In some ways, it's amazing, that a Redcoat show could be put on that would be, completely engaging and entertaining for an audience because of all the other things that everybody involved would have to do. And the analogy I got for it was back in the olden days, a repertory company, they would do a different play every week.
Yeah.
so that kept everything fresh. It doesn't really work that way anymore, but that's how it used to be, So you had a resident repertory company, and one week they would do, Murder at the Gallup, for instance. Then the next week it would be, another play by someone else. Then it might be a kind of mini version of a Shakespeare, but it was and the amount of time and short turnarounds for that sort of acting work. That's what I thought about when I was reading about, the Red Coat Show and having to squeeze in rehearsals and all that kind of thing.
Well, the likes of what you're talking about, the short turnaround, that was what we did back then, stayed with us right to the present day, because likes of a group of us did charity shows in Dunoon for the likes of the community groups and residential homes and all that.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I love doing those shows, and I would love to go back to them, doing them one of these days. And what happened was there were people coming from, say, London, or maybe say some say like Norwich area, or just say right from England, flying up from England. There'd be people coming, like, so we were an hour and a half drives away from Dunoon. We all congregated there, and it was maybe say we go there on the night. We then did a rehearsal that night, and we ended up doing a show the following day.
Yeah.
Because and the turnarounds, as you said, was mega short, but we were used to that.
Yeah.
Because we'd done it. So we could turn up at the house, we'd have a basic show put together, and we could rehearse, we'd do it the next day. I mean, for example, I was a co-organizer of Butlins Reunion at Scarborough in 2014. And one thing we were trying to do was do an old time Red Coat show.
Yeah.
And so we had an hour to put the show together. And so, like I said, we just said, right, turn up. We've got a basic idea what the show's going to be. This is the running order. And then we just say, right, we want X, Y, and Z. And the whole show was done within an hour. And that show is on YouTube as well.
Right. And how many Butlins places are still around, or are there any still around?
Three. You're talking Bogner, Minehead, and Skegness.
Right.
Skegness was the first one. That was the one that started. That was the first camp in '36. A lot of the other ones have been. It's like Craig Tara become caravan parks.
Yeah.
But the likes on some of the other ones have completely disappeared altogether. Likes of in Barry Island, that's completely gone. I think it's like houses have been built on there, but they have erected a plaque in the wall. It was a big wall at the beach at Barry Island, and they actually had a ceremony unveiling the plaque, to remind folk that the camp was there. And I think they did something very similar at Clacton. So, I mean, there's still people that would love it to come back, but whether it will or not, I don't know.
Well, that's really going to be the next question I was going to ask you is, did you think that if somebody was to do that again and use this, that kind of formula, would it work today, or would they have to do something slightly different?
I think it would have to be different. I mean, you could still do something that's different, but still retain the flavour of the old style. Because, I mean, she likes of, you're talking about, say, like the sport of football. People, it's maybe say a style of play that one team have always played, but the thing is, they've had to adapt as they get through the modern era. Attitudes to holiday makers have changed. I mean, there are certain things that we did back then, as I said, you can't do anymore. For example, something simple like we used to do birthday parades in the dining hall, where we used to lead somebody used to carry a cake and lead it through the 1,000-strong dining hall and get the punter to stand on the chair, and the whole 1,000 people would sing happy birthday. You can't do that anymore. Because that's health and safety.
And also, as you say as well, there are things that, like the fat, chubby and all that.
Cheerful, charming, chubby,
you couldn't do that, because of the political correctness aspect. And it just, when I was reading specifically when I was reading book 3, I was kind of thinking to myself, how could you sort of get a Butlins type organisation going, still kind of retain the flavour, but have to cut out some of the things that would have been like traditions, if you like?
Well, I think the one thing that does happen, maybe not so much the camps, but the thing is, you do get special like high events. There's a guy that runs a sort of a high event in Blackpool, where he dresses up as a yellow coat, right? When we did the reunions, we would actually stage our version of those contests. The Noblinese, the Cheerful, Charming, Chubby. We did all that. So the thing is, there's still an audience out there for people that like that kind of stuff. But at the moment, we're just doing it in terms of the reunions. You know, because people that turn up at the reunions, or even like that show that I mentioned, people go there, they know what they're going to what they're expecting.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a case of saying, "Oh, you can't do that today." But the thing is, people go, they say right from the very beginning, "We're turning back the clock." You know, so they know it. So they know exactly what it is. You know.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. Bernard Manning, who was well known for being un-PC. You know.
Oh yes.
And there was a woman who sued him in Manchester.
Yeah.
Because she was offended at the racist element of his jokes.
Yeah.
And it went to court, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. So they hear all the evidence, and then the judge says to this woman, "Did you know what was going to be going on in the show before you went?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Case is dismissed then, because if you knew what was going to happen, why did you go?"
Aye, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
And it's like that old thing about something on TV that I don't like. Well, switch to another channel or switch the TV off. You know.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know if you know that. See, when people were on the stage at Butlins, there was a sign at the side of the stage saying, "We don't want any blue jokes. We don't want such and such a jokes. We will not have such and such a jokes at any price." So it was actually at the side of the stage before anything went on. They like to push the boundaries, but I mean, when people go to Midnight Cabaret, that was a different kettle of fish. I mean, one of the star attractions at the Midnight Cabaret one year at Ayr was Hector Nichol,
right?
Who was not exactly what you call your Mr. Clean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he was one of the funniest guys on the planet. You know, he was an absolute gentleman, and the thing was, his style of act, you wouldn't see him do it on a Sunday Star time in the theatre. But the thing was, because it was Midnight Cabaret, it's for an adult audience. You know. Bob Monkhouse's act was always adult. You know, it wasn't dirty or anything, but it was always adult. It was strong material, you know. Yeah. And Hector Nichol, that was the same. And but certainly there was rules and regulations in terms of what you could do, because you had, first of all, you're catering for the family. Yeah. And the thing, there was times where it was for adults only, and they do state it was for adults only. Yeah. So the thing is, they kind of sort of, I mean, granted, there was people that the complaints element did creep in a bit in 1984. Because they didn't like the idea of being volunteered for things, you know, and the things we were actually told at one point in that last season, don't drag people up, because it used to be what I mentioned about how we carried the guy in the chair, for the Northern East contest. You weren't allowed to do things like that, during that final season, and it was then because I said we were moving away from the high era, and this was the start of it, because people were not wanting to be coerced into doing things, and even though they knew what the style of holiday was, you know. So the thing is, like, why they were objecting, I don't know. But but we could see it was sort of moving in that direction. Yeah,
and in a lot of ways, it's probably quite a sad thing, you know, that it went like that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, from my perspective, I'd probably be quite happy if somebody was to come up, and I'd probably, do you know what, I'd play along that I wasn't wanting to do it, you know, and they'd be cajoling me, and the more they're cajoling me, the more I'd be kind of like resisting. But all the time, I'm actually going to do it, you know, because I'm thinking other people are going to see this and they're going to get a laugh at this.
Exactly. So some people did take things a bit too seriously.
Yeah.
Well, on the whole, I didn't really have any real problems with that. I mean, we were aware of it, rules creeping in, saying, you know, don't drag people up, you know. So, but it was one of the things we just went along with it. But then again, you said it yourself in one of the previous talks, was we knew how far we could push things.
Yeah.
You know, and some people like to sort of push things a wee bit further than others, you know.
No, listen, but to me, that's the whole thing about entertainment. You know, is that you've got to try and get people out of their comfort zone.
Aye.
You know, and the best sort of comedians are really good at doing that.
Aye.
You know, just like they're really good at handling somebody who's going to heckle them.
I mean that I kind of touched on that towards the end of the book, when he actually finally gets to do his stand-up act at the Red Coat show, and it was see, when you get the final week of the season, that's basically anything goes.
Yeah.
Because they can play any tricks on you, whatever they want. And the idea of the compere and walking on and all this kind of stuff, where he's saying, I'm finally there, if I do my acting. Suddenly he finds the compares walking and interrupting. He's had enough practice to be ready for things like that.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
You know, and it's all about adapting. I mean, I think when in the '84 season, Terry was very self-conscious about what he did, and he was getting embarrassed and stuff. But he became more streetwise and sort of said, well, he always used to sort of ride out the storm or go with the flow. And to a certain extent, that's what I was like. I mean, when it came to embarrassing things, I had a lot more embarrassing things happening when I was in the dance team.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about real corkers.
Yeah.
So I mean, so if anything happened when I was in air, I was able to laugh things off.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. So I must admit, when I was coming up to the last couple of pages of book 3, I was a wee bit sad.
Yeah.
You know, because by that time I've invested myself in the books and in the characters within the books and their stories. And then I was just thinking to myself, you know, this is it. You know, that they're moving away, and you know, they get the job offers and stuff like that. And I'm thinking to myself, I wish they would come back. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
It was as if I was actually there, you know, at the time. And, you know, Terry and that would come on stage and say, well, we're not coming back next year, you know, and I've seen you for 3 years. Yeah. And, you know, admittedly, only during that period, you're part of the family, you know. Yeah. And it was that kind of sadness, you know.
I mean, I think this is why one of the reunions thing makes things a bit more special. Yeah. Because the thing is, like, so we know we're not official Butlins Redcoats. I would say we're more like a genetically modified tribute band, you know, because like, see the uniform that I've got, uniform I've got was basically custom made. Right. So we, during the course of that weekend, we went back to our old duties, you know, doing like things like standing at the door, smiling at folk and saying hello and getting involved in the shows and even dressing the stage, you know, which was some, I mean, we're talking about the reunion coming up in Torquay later this month. And we were asked for volunteers to dress the stage and even perform in the au revoir, the way that it used to be done. Granted, we never done it that way. We was more of a fee for all. But it was going, basically during that weekend, we're going to go over the old Redcoat style duties. We put the gear on and we go out and about meeting folk. And so we basically get to sort of live it again, you know, live the whole experience. And then whenever we do any shows, whether it's the virtual stuff or if it's going to be doing actual residential shows, we turn up, we put the gear on, and it makes people smile. Yeah, you know, it still makes people smile because it brings back so much happy memories of that time. You know, when they were at a holiday. You know, the fact that we do the performing, you know, whether we get it right or we don't, that's just by, you know. But the fact is, we did a show at one of the residential homes where we did the first half, 3/4 an hour doing the singing and stuff like that. Then when they had their tea, we had like a half an hour sitting with them, drinking the tea, and they'll basically ask question and answers, interacting with them. And they went back and did the final bit. It was one of the most enjoyable sessions ever. And we can still do things like that. You know, going, you know, if somebody says to us, you know, I mean, my wife was talking to the idea, but see the gala days. Even the idea of saying put the gear on and let's work with the gala people and see if we can start help raise money that way. You don't discount anything, you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I'm quite happy to put the gear on if it's for a good cause, for a good reason, because working at Butlins meant so much to a lot of folk from a staff point of view, but also from people that went on holiday. And and if I walked through the street wearing my Reds on today, they wouldn't take the rip at me. They would smile because they remember all the good times. Yeah,
exactly. So we're running out of time. We could go on forever and ever, I think, you know, chatting away here. But we are limited by time, unfortunately. So going forward for Frank McGroarty.
Yes.
Frankie Boy.
Frankie Boy, yes.
Well, is there anything in the pipeline, maybe a different sort of book that you're thinking of doing? Or
Right, well, what I've been looking at is I'm looking at a series of short stories. That's one. Also, throughout my journalistic career, I've also covered American football quite in detail. I covered the likes of the amateur and the professional game as part of my journalism, and so I'm looking at a book on that. But the thing is, and also with the radio, I want to try and step that up as well. But the thing is now I mentioned at the start about I'm doing sort of reevaluation of myself.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is last month I was diagnosed as being dyslexic.
You've mentioned that.
You know, and the thing was that was like I got told that last month. And the thing is, it kind of explained why the last book took me a wee bit longer.
Yeah.
Or one of the reasons, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in terms of, I've got to basically do a total reorganize myself. But I mean, that's my 2 books ideas planned.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm going to be doing. I want to do some more performing with the guys, the Button Squad. Whether it's virtual or whether it's doing the actual, residential homes, I would like to do that again sometime. Even the idea of turning up at one of the residential homes performing, in the gear.
Yeah.
Because we could do that. But I mean, obviously we'd have to get a lot of notice. But certainly in terms of moving forward, I'm certainly not giving up on the writing. Because it was such a thrill, the fact of the response I've been getting, and see the likes of the response we've been getting for these podcasts.
Yeah.
To say that I'm chuffed is a mega understatement. And people are, they're down. I've seen the amount of downloads that's been coming down.
Yeah.
And I thought, what?
I know it's a whole new aspect for me as well, because everything I've done radio-wise has always been music shows.
I mean, certainly the likes of the thing with the podcast is it is thrilling. I mean, I've always said that anything I've done, whatever I do, I try and be the best I can be.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I always try and invest myself into trying to give myself the best chance. And if people do listen to my shows or read the books and they enjoy what I do, it's absolutely fantastic. I absolutely thank them to the bottom of my heart for that. Yeah. And if these likes of the Butlins books, hopefully people that do read it, it's a trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
For the way it used to be, but also it's a story. It's based on a real story.
Yeah.
It wasn't just me, but the thing is, a lot of romances were made at Butlins.
Yeah.
And so it kind of sort of goes into the memory banks there, because I remember what I was like when I read the first one. When I wrote the first one, I was filling up because I was like 18 again when I was writing it, and because it became a labour of love. And the reviews I've been getting on like Amazon and stuff like that has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, the one thing it did sort of throw me a wee bit this morning was, how you talked about the idea about getting recommendations from Amazon. I got one this morning recommending a book for me. Yeah, right. It was mine.
That is a good place to finish, I think. So, listen, once again, Frank, thank you very much for taking the time to chat along with me about book 3. More power to your elbow, and hopefully we'll get the chance to meet in the real world.
I shall turn up at the studio one of these days. I look forward to it, mate. It's good to talk to you once again.
You too. Thanks a lot, Frank.
Bye.
Bye now.
Ending like talk radio.